Today we have Ed Fox, is a long-time property developer and buy-to-let investor from East London and runs the host of the Canary Wharf PIN Investors Network meeting. Ed specializing in creating high yields, working with joint venture partners, and also mentors and teaches other investors on the rules and regulations of being an investor and being a landlord. Today, Ed is going to give us some tips and advice on what we can do on if we have negative equity on our property. Ed, the first question is, what advice would you give to someone who has a property in negative equity?
Hi there, Shamini. So negative equity can be a tricky one, but really the first bit of advice I'd give is don't panic. Negative equity actually isn't necessarily a problem. If you can still pay your mortgage and you don't need to or you don't want to move, then you may not need to worry about being in negative equity. It's only really if you lose your job or whatever, you can't pay your mortgage, then the negative equity bit really kicks in. Or if you need to move on, so if you need to sell your house. For those people who really they can always pay their mortgage and they never want to move, then negative equity is not a problem. So just live with it, and don't let it worry you too much. It does get more complicated if you can't pay the mortgage or you do need to move, and that's really so I guess my first bit of advice is don't panic, and then there are still solutions out there if you do get into the complicated bit, as in you can't pay your mortgage or do need to move. There are people who can find solutions to help you. So again, don't panic, just be sensible and look for the people who can help.
Thank you, Ed. I mean, what advice would you give to anyone who'd like to sell their home or investment if the property is in negative equity and they like to sell the property quickly?
Okay, so I think the first thing that you have to decide if if your house is negative equity, if you're going to go to an agent and they're going to get market value, as we call it, for the property, negative equity means that you're not going to receive as much as you have to pay the mortgage. So you're going to have to pay towards selling your house rather than get money for selling your house. And that's so really the first point is that you have to decide if you're prepared to take a loss, whether you actually are prepared to pay to get rid of your property, or it's come down to a point I made in the first webinar we did together, which is whether actually if you know the kind of problems that you're having, where actually if someone had a more flexible solution, whether you would be open to it in order not to take a loss, okay, or not to take as much of a loss. The second, there are lots of ways of transferring property more slowly than with a traditional sale, to make it easier for the buyer to pay more for your home than it would be worth today. The market value might be. If they can pay for a longer period of time, then often they can pay for it pay more for it just because they're taking longer, and often they can pay more for it because I think, well, over time it will go up in value, therefore I might pay tomorrow's price instead of today's price if I can actually buy it the day after tomorrow. But in the meantime, I can make sure that your mortgage is paid and that sort of thing. And that might allow you not to have to make a loss on property. You may still, if the loss that you make if you sell it today is great, you may still have to burden some of that loss, but the loss can be greatly reduced, and sometimes you might only have to pay a third of your loss rather than all of it. So it might be that that actually is a solution that would work very well, whereas taking all of the negatives and paying the whole lot off is something that you couldn't afford to do. So when people like myself buy properties, when we buy them slowly, it's a little like we rent property from the seller for a while, but the price we will pay, sometimes it's the price of the future, but it's already been agreed today. Okay, and that's kind of how the process works. We might spend money on the property, we might do it up, but because we know that someday we're going to be the owners of the property, we don't mind making improvements to it sometimes. And generally, it's we know we're going to effectively buy property in the future. We will always make sure that it works for us for what we want it to do. So, myself, I'll either do work to it or I rent it out to tenants. I'm a landlord. I have to know that the property is always in a very good state, so that I always have tenants who are desiring the property. Now, often this can be a problem for homeowners to imagine their house, being let out to tenants where they see other people. But if it's a case of either you take a big loss on selling your property, or actually someone can help you not to loss, then that might be a solution that works for you. The type of arrangements which an investor will rent the property, as it were, before they actually purchase it. It can be much tailored to what works for both parties. So it's not there's not only one kind of legal agreement, group of words exactly the same for each agreement. It needs to be written by solicitors. So the seller will be represented by a solicitor, and the buyer will be represented by a solicitor. And that's very, very important that you always have legal representation. But each contract, as it were, that works in this way can very much tailor to the situation of the seller. So if you're in this kind of situation, to understand what you need out of it, and I really mean what you need out of it, is very important, because the solution that you create with the buyer can solve that need for you, can solve the problem, or can get rid of the problem for you. And there are very few problems that can't be solved with the more creative contracts, the more creative solutions for buying properties. Because these solutions are digital and they are fairly sophisticated in content, it is absolutely important to make sure that you deal with honest people. So if you don't feel comfortable with someone that you're talking to, then walk away from someone else. Okay, there are an awful lot. I know an awful lot of very honest and ethical property investors. There are an awful lot of people in every industry who are not ethical and honest. They're different. So if you don't deal with someone, find someone else, and always make sure that you do have legal representation, because your lawyer is there to stand for you and to work for you and to represent you and understand this sort of thing more than you will. Almost certainly, they understand it more than I do, and I do it, as part of my job. I'm educated in it. And if, again, a bit like if you're uncomfortable with a buyer of your property, you can walk away. Also, if your solicitor doesn't seem to understand what's going on, is being led by the other side, then get a solicitor that does understand. And very often, the actual purchaser might even know a solicitor that you could go and instruct, just because they've been sort of offered. If I'm talking to a seller of a property and they don't know a solicitor who can help them, then I'm list 3 or 5 that I know that might understand what's going on, and they can choose any one of them. Okay, as soon as the seller instructs that solicitor, the solicitor has a duty of care to look after that person. They have nothing to do with me. Okay, they cannot act to my advantage on my behalf. They always have to act for the seller. So the solicitor will always be in your court.
Thank you very much for the tips that you've provided. Genuine Property Buyers, you've heard it here first on our Genuine Property TV. And Ed will have another series of tips and advice for you. And we are much privileged to have Ed give tips and advice to our YouTube subscribers. Thank you very much for your time, and watch out and click the like button. Ask us any questions if you'd like to ask any questions to Ed, or if you'd like to comment. Let us know and we'll feature it in our next video. Thank you very much, Ed.